Curixnel's four brains had achieved perfect consensus on exactly one thing during his 7 months with Fourth Squad. Human stupidity operated on principles unknown to established physics, and Corporal Stevens was currently violating at least three of them while attempting to drink a glass of water upside down. 20 credits says he drowns himself, Private Amy Wang announced, leaning back in her chair with the casual confidence of someone who'd seen this performance before. Sergeant Lisa Hoffman didn't look up from her tablet. 30 says he only gets half of it down before Parker trips him. I'm not going to trip him, Specialist David Parker said, already positioning his boot near Stephen's precarious hand placement. Curixnel's three eye stalks swiveled independently to track the unfolding disaster, an evolutionary adaptation that had once helped his species avoid predators on their home world of Thexis Prime. Now it merely allowed him to witness this human craziness from multiple angles simultaneously. The logic centers of his brain, all four of them, struggled to process why a species capable of faster-than-light travel would voluntarily invert themselves for social entertainment. The bar, ironically named The Last Resort, had become Fourth Squad's unofficial headquarters during their shore leave on Station Arcturus. It was a narrow establishment wedged between a prosthetics shop and a Telexian noodle vendor, with the kind of ambience that suggested the owner had given up on ambience entirely. The walls bore scorch marks from at least two separate incidents, and the house rule, you break it, you die with it, hung above the bar in 17 different languages. Stevens began his attempt. Water went up his nose, across his face, and somehow behind his ear. He completed the maneuver having consumed approximately 15 milliliters of the 200 milliliter glass. Wang whooped and held out her hand toward Hoffman. Pay up, Sarge. The bet was whether he'd drown himself, not whether he'd succeed, Hoffman replied, her tone suggesting she'd litigated this exact semantic distinction before. He's still breathing. Curixnel's translator implant struggled with the exchange. Humans engaged in what they called bets, formalized agreements to exchange currency based on predicted outcomes. A logical species would bet on things with calculable probabilities. Weather patterns, stock fluctuations, the orbital decay of small moons. Humans bet on whether their colleagues could defy biology and physics for no practical purpose whatsoever. Stevens righted himself, water dripping from his regulation haircut. He noticed Curixnel's eye stalks focused on him and grinned. What's the matter, Curix? Never seen peak human performance before. I have witnessed human performance on multiple occasions, Curixnel said, his vocal harmonizer giving his words a melodic quality that contrasted sharply with the statement's content. The peaks remain statistically indistinguishable from the valleys. Parker snorted beer through his nose, which triggered a 3-minute coughing fit that involved Hoffman performing what humans called the Heimlich maneuver, but which Curixnel had privately begun calling aggressive affection. This was month 7 of Curixnel's assignment to 4th Squad, 3rd Platoon, Human Marine Expeditionary Unit Gamma. The Thexian High Command had selected him for his linguistic abilities, his decorated combat record, and his psychological stability rating of 9.2 out of 10. That rating, he reflected, had been calculated before prolonged human exposure. He estimated it had dropped to a 6.4, possibly lower. All right, children. Hoffman powered down her tablet and stood. Before anyone suggests anything else stupid, let's establish ground rules for tonight. Parker, you're not allowed within 10 meters of the karaoke machine. That was one time. You made a Krellian cry. They don't have tear ducts. We still don't know how you managed that. Curixnel did know, actually. He'd been present during the incident in question. Parker had attempted to sing something called Bohemian Rhapsody and had somehow made it sound like a mating call from a species that had evolved to communicate pain. The Krellian hadn't been crying from sadness, but from a sympathetic evolutionary response to distress signals. Wang raised her hand like a student seeking permission. Question. Are we allowed to teach Curix drinking games, or is that still classified as cultural contamination? I have studied human recreational consumption rituals, Curixnel said, his eye stalks stiffening with what his squad mates had learned to recognize as indignation. I understand the principles. One consumes ethanol, a literal poison, until cognitive functions deteriorate. Then one makes increasingly poor decisions until unconsciousness or property damage occurs. See, he gets it. Stevens clapped Curixnel's shoulder, a gesture the Thexian had learned to tolerate despite his species' sensitivity to touch. You're practically human already. The statement should have been absurd. Curixnel possessed 3 eye stalks, 4 brains, crystalline bone structure, and a digestive system that processed minerals. His skin was a shifting pattern of bioluminescent scales that changed color with his emotional state. Currently, They flickered between green, confusion, and orange, reluctant amusement, creating what Wang had described as disco ball vibes. Yet something in Stephen's words rang with uncomfortable truth. Curixnell had begun to anticipate human illogic. When Hoffman said they were going to play it by ear, he no longer expected them to involve auditory organs in tactical planning. When Parker threatened to eat his hat, Curixnell no longer worried about nutritional deficiencies or psychological breaks. He had even started to find their chaos comprehensible. This was probably a bad sign. The bartender, a grizzled human named Murphy who'd allegedly served during the Centauri campaign, delivered their next round. He set down Curixnell's mineral suspension with a reverence that suggested he appreciated having at least one customer who wouldn't try to drink it on fire. Tell me something, Curix, Hoffman said, settling into what he recognized as her philosophical mode. The one she adopted 3 drinks in when her strategic mind turned toward larger questions. How do we compare to what you expected? Before assignment, I mean. Curixnell's scales rippled through several colors before settling on purple, which roughly translated to deep contemplation. The Thexian military briefing described humans as chaos-oriented but effective. I believe this to be political euphemism. And now, Wang leaned forward, genuinely curious. Now I understand it was technical specification. His eye stalks focused on each squad member in turn. You approach warfare like you approach recreation, with insufficient planning, excessive confidence, and disturbing enthusiasm. During the Kepler station operation, when we were pinned by Vrexian heavy weapons, Sergeant Hoffman's tactical solution was to, and I quote, go around the back and kick in their stupid bug faces. It worked, Hoffman pointed out. It worked, Curixnell agreed, his scales flashing orange again despite himself. This violated 7 principles of tactical doctrine and required me to recalculate my entire understanding of military science. Stevens ordered another round with hand signals that somehow Murphy understood, despite them resembling no known sign language. So what you're saying is we're growing on you, like a fungus. Fungus is an apt comparison. You are persistent, thrive in adverse conditions, and your presence fundamentally alters the environment. I'm going to take that as a compliment, Parker said. It was not intended as Curixnell stopped himself. This was another human trait he'd absorbed, the futility of fighting certain conversational currents. Yes, a compliment. The evening progressed through what Curixnell had mentally catalogued as the standard human recreational pattern. Initial beverages consumed while establishing social hierarchy through verbal sparring, followed by increasingly elaborate stories from previous operations, eventually degrading into speculation about improbable scenarios. Currently, they were debating whether Wang could take a Vrexian warrior in single combat if she was armed with only a chair. The leg of the chair could serve as a stabbing implement. Curixnell found himself contributing to his own surprise. The Vrexian exoskeleton has weak points at the thorax joints. 4 humans turned to stare at him. What? His scales flickered defensive red. This is practical tactical analysis. Curix, buddy. Stephen's grin was enormous. You just willingly participated in human stupid talk. That's like graduation-level integration. I was merely applying logical analysis to a hypothetical scenario. Sure you were. Hoffman's expression held something that might have been pride, which was somehow worse. Next thing you know, you'll be volunteering for Parker's next terrible idea. I would never. I'm thinking about trying to surf on a cargo loader, Parker announced, during the loading sequence, while it's moving. Curixnell's scales went through a rapid color sequence that his squadmates had never seen before, finally settling on a pattern that resembled a warning display from a venomous creature. That would result in severe injury or death. The margin for error is effectively 0. The risk-to-reward ratio is incalculable because there is no reward. Silence fell over the table. Then Wang said quietly, he's calculating the specific ways it would kill Parker. He's thinking about it. I am not, Curixnell stopped. His fourth brain, the one responsible for pattern recognition, had indeed been running probability simulations on cargo loader velocities and Thexian skeletal compression tolerances. Not because he would actually surf a cargo loader, that would be insane, but because some infected part of his consciousness wanted to know if it was possible. This was it. The moment the Thexian High Command had probably warned him about in training materials he'd skimmed because they'd seemed paranoid. Human insanity was contagious, not through pathogens or pheromones, but through prolonged exposure to their fundamental worldview. That reality was negotiable, that probability was a suggestion, and that the phrase, "this will probably kill me," was the beginning of a plan rather than its conclusion. Hoffman must have seen something in his bioluminescence because her expression softened. Hey, Curix. Real talk for a second. You doing okay? I know this can't be easy, being the only non-human in an infantry squad. Curixnell considered the question with all four brains. The honest answer was complex. He was exhausted by human unpredictability. His meditation routines had become increasingly vital for maintaining psychological coherence. He'd filed 17 separate incident reports before realizing nobody read them because, in his own words, that's just fourth squad. On Thexis Prime, he said slowly, we have a saying. The rock that travels with the avalanche eventually forgets it was once still. I believe I am forgetting stillness. Stevens raised his glass. That's either really profound or you're having a stroke. Either way, I'll drink to it. They all raised their glasses. Mineral suspension, cheap beer, and something Wang claimed was whiskey, but which Murphy had definitely watered down. Curixnell clicked his drinking appendage against their glasses in the human gesture of camaraderie. Tomorrow they'd ship out for the frontier worlds, where territorial disputes with the Solarian Confederation were turning hostile. There would be combat, chaos, and probably several dozen more situations where Curixnell would have to recalculate his understanding of possible human behavior. But tonight, in a bar with scorch marks on the walls and a house rule about dying with your mistakes, Curixnell discovered something his people's advanced civilization had missed in all their logical progression. Sometimes wisdom meant knowing which insanity to join. All right, he said, his scales shifting to decisive blue. I will not surf the cargo loader, but I will calculate the exact specifications required to survive the attempt. Parker's face lit up like a child receiving an unexpected gift. Hoffman buried her face in her hands. I'm putting that in my report. Nobody reads your reports, Wang reminded her cheerfully. As the evening dissolved into technical specifications, improbable scenarios, and the kind of laughter that came from people who'd saved each other's lives more times than they could count, Q Rixnell reflected on another Thexian proverb. The lone tree grows straight, but the trees of the forest learn to bend. He was learning to bend. And somehow, impossibly, that felt less like compromise and more like evolution.